Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. All right, for our first story today, we're diving into an unfortunate but all too common encounter with a Karen at the library. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with a turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. She thought that I worked at the library, then bullied me when I didn't. So this happened Thursday at the library close to my house. I was walking by some books on display when I accidentally knocked over some of those books. 7 fell off the shelf. These were new children's books which had come out in the past 3 months. While I was picking them up and placing them back on the display stands, I heard a loud, "Excuse me." I'm extremely socially awkward and tend to shy away from direct confrontation if at all possible. I don't like causing a scene. Plus, this is a library. I turned around and this lady looked like your typical soccer mom and had 3 children under the age of 10 with her, 2 boys and 1 girl. I spoke in a whisper as I didn't want to disturb the other patrons of the library. Sorry, She cut me off abruptly. Sorry does not cut it. I've spent the past couple minutes trying to get your attention. I have a form of autism, and when I'm focused on a task, I tend to drown out all other background sounds. This is, of course, unintentional. I tried to explain that to this woman, but she wasn't having any of it. Stop coming up with excuses to avoid doing your job. It was then I realized that she thought I worked at the library, as there was no official dress code for the library workers, and I was dressed in business casual. I was wearing a pair of black pants with a matching black shirt, which was striped, along with black ballet flats. "Ma'am, I don't..." She cut me off again, her face getting red. "My children need books to read for their class, and you will get those books." Now, I should note I was with my mom at the library, as she's my main form of transportation, and I had an appointment with my therapist at 3 p.m., the location of which is close to the library. I almost had tears in my eyes as this woman berated me in front of her children, saying I was incompetent, the R word, stupid, and should work a job that's more my speed. I couldn't take it and began to cry. It's been a very long time since I encountered this kind of bullying and verbal abuse. My mom was looking for me as it was nearing 3 o'clock and saw me standing there crying while this horrible woman yelled at me. My mom's always been there for me, supported me, and is definitely a mama bear. When she heard this woman calling me such awful things, she went into mama bear mode and sped on over to where I was, getting up in this woman's face and said, and I quote, "That's my daughter you're speaking to, and I do not take kindly to people who bully others, but especially adults like yourself who should know better. My daughter's only 2 more semesters away from graduating college despite her ADHD and Asperger's." The woman's face went from red to white. She stammered and stuttered, trying to find the right words. Meanwhile, I asked the kids with her what kind of books they were looking for, and that even though I may not work at the library, I may be able to help them locate a certain type or genre of book they'd enjoy reading. The kids were surprisingly far more pleasant than their mother. I directed the kids over to my favorite books when I was their age. The girl chose a Junie B. Jones book, and the boys chose a Magic Treehouse book. The kids went back to their mom and told her that they found some books to read. With a huff and a snort, she stomped over towards the library checkout desk. They checked out their books, then left. My mom made sure I was okay and asked me why I helped the kids of that horrible excuse of a mother. Her words, not mine. I told her that they were not the ones who yelled and berated me, rather it was their mother, so I held no ill will towards the children, whereas I held great contempt towards their mother. Good on you for not holding it against the kids. Shame on her for acting like employees were her personal emotional punching bag. And I think with your attitude and actions, treating them respectfully despite their mother's actions, they'll see that and it'll help shape their future, knowing that all adults aren't a-holes. And our second story. Kid versus physics, how I won the war against an in-flight menace. One year during the time that I was studying in another city, I was flying home for the break by myself. It was a domestic flight on a small aircraft, an A320 I think, and I followed a mother and her whining 2 kids down the aisle, hoping that they were at the opposite end of the plane than me. My worst fears were confirmed when they entered the row behind my allocated aisle seat. There was a boy, 10-ish, sitting directly behind me, the mother next to him in the middle, and a well-behaved, complacent little girl next to her who turned out never to be a problem. I can't say the same for her brother. As we climbed out of the clouds, I busted out the laptop to start watching a movie. I had headphones and was getting into it when I noticed a nudge in the back of my seat. Hoping it was a one-off, the nudge happened again and again, and I realized the kid behind me was kicking my seat. This was no pushing with the foot. This was full-fledged kicking that was not stopping. I turned around to see if the mother was doing anything about it, and she just ignored it, reading her magazine. After 10 minutes of feeling every kick, I turned to the mother and said, "Excuse me, would you mind asking your son to stop kicking my seat?" She then forcefully pushed his knees down so that his feet were on the ground and didn't say a word to me. Rude. 5 minutes later, it started again, only harder this time. This kid was spitefully and intentionally pissing me off, and the mother clearly didn't give a F. So when the air hostess came to offer drinks, I had an idea of how to teach the kid a valuable life lesson: don't be a C word. After I asked for coffee, I heard the kid asking for a cup of water. This would work perfectly. I felt the kicking stop when he received his water, and I heard him extend his tray to put it down. I couldn't be sure that his cup was on the tray, but I figured I'd go with the plan anyway. I pressed the recline release button on the armrest of my seat and violently shoved myself backward with force. The full cup was indeed on the tray and flew backward, covering his lap with water. He said, "Ah!" and then started complaining to his mom that the man in front of me did it on purpose. She was annoyed and obviously hadn't realized I'd done it on purpose and said, "Excuse me, you've spilled water all over my son." I replied, "Well, next time you take your kids on a plane, maybe you could ensure that they're not annoying other passengers by kicking their seats when it makes the difference." The guy next to me laughs and fist bumps me. The mother shuts up and the kicking stops, and I watch my movie. OMG, yes. Yes, this is so good. A tale of petty revenge on a kid who deserves it can be rare, as they're often so protected. Surprised the mom didn't have a fit. Perhaps she had some sense and realized her son was just taught a lesson. Or she didn't want to be the cause of an unscheduled landing. Good for you. And our next story. Tell me I'm cutting your fabric wrong? I'll cut it exactly how you want it. Context. I work in a craft store that also has a fabric department. Customer brings up a bolt and asks for an amount. I cut it. I usually give at least an inch more than they ask for because sometimes the previous cut was diagonal or jagged or whatever. I also just like to be nice. Yesterday, I hear the service bell ring and I walk over to take the order. Lo and behold, a coworker from my department's here before her shift and wants some fabric cut. Now, I don't really enjoy coworker because she has a very particular way of working. She changed a lot of things around to suit her style, and it makes it near impossible for me to do my job properly sometimes. But this is the fourth person that's been in my department in the span of a few months, and unfortunately, she's been the best out of all of them. I just deal with her crap when I come in and do my job as best I can. Anyway, coworker asked me to measure out the fabric, and she says she can cut it herself. I tell her I'm more than willing to cut it since I cut fabric for other employees all the time, no big deal. She gives me a large roll of mesh and asks if I'll cut 1.5 yards for her. Here's the offense. I start measuring, taking care to go over the amount like I always do. She immediately scolds me and tells me I'm doing it wrong. She says that I shouldn't start from 0 and measure 1/2. She says I should put the edge at the yard mark and measure backwards. I was taught differently by a different employee, but okay, I say I'll do it this way. She keeps telling me why I'm wrong and how I could have shorted her, and she's the best. I hold my tongue and cut. I don't appreciate her being so condescending towards me, but I want to be done with this interaction. She then asks for 2.5 yards of a fleece bolt cut the exact same way. The revenge? I don't give her any extra. I put the edge of the fabric just a hair over the line, and I go slower than usual to boot. No extra for you, coworker. That inch is reserved for a polite customer. So this makes me laugh because it's such a small thing. The fact you put the extra energy into it makes it so damn petty. Very petty revenge. And our last story. My neighbor tried to steal my land. When we moved into our home a few years ago, we never imagined we'd have a property dispute straight out of a legal thriller. At first, everything seemed perfect. It was a nice neighborhood, quiet. We had plenty of space to enjoy. Then one day, we realized something was off. One of the neighbor's outbuildings, essentially a large shed, was partially sitting on our land. It wasn't a small overstep either. A good portion of it had crept well past the boundary. It had been built over a decade ago by the previous owners of their house, and we hadn't noticed it when we first moved in. Being reasonable people, we approached the neighbors about the issue. At first, they seemed cooperative. Since they were trying to sell their house, they offered to buy the section of land under their shed to clear up any issues. We agreed, thinking it would be a simple, amicable resolution, but we didn't count on their solicitor turning this into a full-blown war. A few weeks later, the neighbor changed their tune. Their conveyancing solicitor advised them that they should not buy the land or remove the encroaching structure. Instead, they were told to just leave it for the new buyers to deal with. Lie to potential buyers and let them inherit the mess? We were stunned. They knew the shed was on land they didn't own, yet they were fully prepared to hide the issue from whoever bought the house next. Even worse, they started throwing around the term adverse possession. They were seriously considered claiming our land as their own because the shed had been there for more than 10 years. I wasn't about to let that happen. Since they wanted to play dirty, I decided to make selling their house as difficult as possible. First, I got a specialist solicitor who handled adverse possession cases. Together, we compiled evidence proving we owned the land. This included survey maps clearly marking our property lines, photographs from before we moved in proving there was never an agreement for them to use our land, Google Earth images, even if blurry, showing the shed on our land. Then came the real fun. Since they listed their home for sale, I contacted the real estate agent handling their listing. I sent them a formal email outlining the land dispute and included a copy of the legal notice from Land Registry. This meant that every potential buyer would be made aware of the ongoing boundary issue. And let me tell you, buyers hate legal disputes. Not long after we received a notice from the Land Registry, our neighbors had officially applied to take ownership of our land through adverse possession. I immediately filed an objection, blocking their claim. The case was escalated to a first-tier tribunal. My solicitor assured me that we had an airtight case, and even if the legal fees became overwhelming, we could withdraw it at any time. Meanwhile, their house sale came to a screeching halt. Every time a potential buyer visited, I made sure they knew, hey, just so you know, there's an active legal case regarding that shed over there. Might want to ask their solicitor about that before making an offer. Word got around. Buyers started pulling out of negotiations. Their property sat on the market longer than they expected. Then their worst nightmare happened. After months of waiting, we got an update from Land Registry. The neighbor's solicitor failed to respond to the tribunal notice. Since they didn't fight back in time, their adverse possession claim was rejected. It was over. They lost. Then my solicitor sent them a final letter demanding they remove the shed from our land, and finally they broke. The neighbor, who once smugly insisted that it's been there for over a decade, so it's ours now, was now desperate to sell their house. They couldn't afford more legal trouble, so they agreed to remove the shed. We watched with satisfaction as they paid to have their precious outbuilding torn down. A few months later, they finally sold the house, but at a lower price than they originally wanted. And that, my friends, is how I turned my neighbor's scam into their worst nightmare and walked away with the last laugh. Your neighbors really thought they had a loophole to steal land, like squatting with extra steps. But their master plan fell apart the moment they tried to use legal jargon they barely understood. I like how they went from "it's ours now" to completely tanking their own home sale, all because they were too stubborn to admit they were in the wrong. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.